so much for being here and joining our panel. My name is Meredith Tufts. I'm the Coalition Coordinator with Fossil for Eugene, and we have a really exciting panel. We've got folks from all over the state, so we're going to take you on a little tour of local action. As I'm sure you all know, this is a frustrating and kind of crazy time at the federal level, and all of that, of course, trickles down to the state. So it's really an exciting time to be doing local work that's more centered on what we can actually do in our communities. So we've got great folks to talk you through that. We'll go through some introductions and then we'll get started.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for being here. Nice to see some new people and some old folks that I've known for a long time who have heard this presentation before, but there is some new information, which I think will be fun for you to hear. I'm Carra, Sahler, she, her pronouns. I'm the director and one of 4 staff attorneys at the Green Energy Institute. We're housed in the Environmental Natural Resources Energy Law program at Lewis and Clark Law School. I think of ourselves as a think and do tank, which I think I stole from one of you guys back there.
Hi everyone, nice to see you. My name is Cockram, I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Oregon Energy Transition Organizer at Breach Collective.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jess Grady-Benson. I'm the organizing director at Rogue Climate. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nikita, Daryanani. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Climate and Energy Policy Manager at the Coalition of Communities of Color. We're based in Portland.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Samantha Hernandez, and I use she, her pronouns. I am the Healthy Climate Program Manager at the Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility.
Morning, y'all. Good to see some of you in person for the first time. Brennan, Breen, PM pronouns, campaign coordinator of Energizing.
Thanks, you guys.
And we've got some volunteers from 350 who are doing a recording of the panel. It's going to be, up for folks to see, but we can take out parts with questions. So when you're asking questions at the end, don't worry about it being out distributed if you don't want it to be.
Oops. Everything happened. Here we go. We're good. All right, so here's our agenda today. I'm going to speak a little bit about legal pathways, what local governments can and can't do in Oregon. Samantha is going to talk about public health in electrifying Portland. Nikita is going to talk about the equitable climate policy and how CCC works with frontline communities. Jess is going to talk about youth for electrification, very uplifting and exciting work that's been happening down in Southern Oregon. And then Brennan has a great presentation for you about communicating. How do we communicate with our public and electeds? And then we end with this amazing Eugene Clean Energy Fund announcement and explanation that I will give. So here's my presentation. We're talking about legal pathways for local governments to regulate natural gas in Oregon. Here's my agenda. This is a lot, and Meredith's going to be timing me. So if I don't get through all of it, that might happen, and that's okay because we have some great people we want to make sure that you hear from, and I'm always happy to answer questions or follow up afterwards. But we're going to start with some general principles of local authority in Oregon. We're going to talk about some potential barriers and then how to overcome those barriers. And then I'm going to do somewhat of a little bit of an awkward thing. Well, I'll introduce each concept before each panelist speaks to kind of give you some legal grounding in what it is that the local government is doing. But we'll start here with just general principles for the law students in the room. You might be thinking about sort of our layer cake. It's actually a little bit more of a marble cake between federal, state, and local authorities. But the US Constitution provides power to the federal government and to the state governments, but it doesn't say anything about local governments. So local authority actually comes from the state, and Oregon's Constitution allows city voters to confer authority on their city governments by enacting a home rule charter. And so that's like the city's constitution. And most charters in Oregon give cities the maximum authority allowable by law rather than enumerating specific powers. So that's really helpful when we think about what can a city do? And so generally we talk about cities as having what are called police powers, and that's not maybe what you're thinking, but it does include some of that. But it also includes public health, safety, morals, and welfare. And it can license and tax. So this is capacious authority, right? This is, the charter typically authorizes the action. The only remaining question is whether a state or federal law takes precedence over the local law. In other words, the question cities can ask is, show me where I can't. And we have to remind our public authorities about that, or our public leaders about that. So what does that mean for curbing natural gas use? Local governments typically may manage how, when, and where public utilities use the right-of-way. They have authority to protect the public health and safety, as I said. And they may use existing processes within their jurisdictions to restrict natural gas, so long as they keep their local authority in mind and they consider existing state and federal barriers. So I'm going to talk a lot about preemption. Preemption is really important here to avoid litigation. When you're considering viable actions, remember that that supremacy clause is the top layer. That's the US Constitution, right? It directs that the federal law is positioned over state law. And because a city is a creature of the state, federal law also trumps local law. So you can't have a local law conflicting with an existing federal law, right? And you can't have a state law conflicting with a local law. I will say that states approach preemption in different ways when they're thinking about, this is really annoying. When they are thinking about preemption, there are different ways that states approach it. Here in Oregon, we're really lucky. We have basically these two kinds of preemption. So the question is, let me see if I actually have it on the next slide. Yes, good. Express preemption, right? When the state legislature clearly and unambiguously, that's language from case law, clearly, quote, and unambiguously, quote, expresses its intent to preempt local policy making on a particular subject, okay? So it has to be very clear. And you do have implied preemption, and this is when two laws are in conflict such that they cannot operate concurrently. In other words, the local law is preempted when the operation of the local law makes it impossible to comply with a state statute. So courts, the case law is pretty clear. They generally start their analysis by assuming that the local action is consistent with state law. You might, for the law students in the room or lawyers who remember back to their Constitution class, remember a flavor of preemption called occupy the field. That applies for federal and state and federal to local, but it doesn't apply when you're looking at state preemption over local law here in Oregon. Thank you, Aya. Okay, so you've just heard me. Made it worse.
There's another stand on the corner if you need.
It just seems to be the plug, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, here, this is a picture of the gas distribution system, which I think is really helpful because we don't really think about. We don't see it, right? We see our electric transmission system and distribution system, but we don't see our gas transmission system. It's all underground. And so I wanted to show you this picture, and I'm going to come back to it again when I talk about the Berkeley case, because what we're talking about here is local governments managing how, when, and where utilities use the public rights of way. So those are streets, sidewalks, right? The city owns those public rights of way. And so you can see here that the gas utilities have to install and maintain infrastructure under or on or beneath those public right-of-ways to connect the gas meter outside the building. So local governments may have a franchise agreement or some other kind of mechanism which organizes the relationship the city has with the utility and allows the utility to access the right-of-way. That agreement or licensing ordinance is going to cover things we don't really care about, right, as advocates. It's going to be like, does the city have Is the city able to be aware of when the utility is going to access the right of way? Are they complying with the construction code, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What we care about, though, is whether the gas utility has the right to expand in the territory. And so the thing is that when you're thinking about action, when you're thinking about a city taking action against a gas utility to regulate gas, you have to look at that agreement and just make sure it doesn't bind the government in specific ways. I will say the conclusion of a franchise term, and these are usually very long terms, right? These are 10 years. So if you're living in a city and you want to make sure that your city can take action to regulate natural gas, you need to look at that franchise agreement ASAP and look and see when it comes up for that term. And it can be an opportunity to renegotiate. I will say, like, the city of Ann Arbor is an example of that, where as it was approaching its renewal period, it actually issued like a request for proposals or a call for information for ideas about how the city could meet its space heating needs in accordance with its 2030 goal of carbon neutrality. And as a result of that exercise, voters in Ann Arbor actually approved a sustainable energy utility to help the city achieve its climate goals. Having said that, trying to renegotiate an agreement with a gas utility can be a fruitless and frustrating exercise that brings you no closer to your goals. Eugene is a perfect example of that. So renegotiation of an agreement rarely achieves the outcomes you want to see, and you've just wasted time. But you do need to be aware of what that franchise agreement calls for. Okay, so the most common method to regulate natural gas around the nation is to use building codes. That makes sense, right? We're talking about gas appliances in our homes. What kind of infrastructure or piping are going into our homes? But as I mentioned, any local law seeking to promote building electrification has to avoid regulating in an area that the federal law already regulates in. So this introduction, the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, probably many of you are in the room already know about EPCA and actually could give this presentation maybe even better than me. But basically what EPCA covers is energy efficiency, energy use, or water use of a covered product. And covered products include equipment like furnaces, HVAC systems, gas ranges, water heaters. So this is an express preemption provision. There is a building code exception to EPCA preemption, and that exception allows energy efficiency or energy use standards for EPCA covered appliances as long as the building code complies with 7 explicit statutory criteria. The state of Washington has an EPCA compliant building code. There is an ongoing challenge as a result of a ballot initiative. The lower court already concluded that ballot initiative violated the single subject rule in Washington, and that case is pending before the Washington Supreme Court on direct review. So we hope to see the result of that action soon. Okay, here's that distribution system again, because I'm going to talk about Berkeley, about the California Restaurant Association v. Berkeley case. This is the main case that's applicable to us in Oregon as part of the Ninth Circuit. And it is interpreting EPCA, the Energy Policy Conservation Act. Now, what's really important to know is that Berkeley prohibited natural gas piping in new buildings. So it adopted the ordinance as part of its health and safety code, not its building code. It added language specifically indicating that it did not intend to impact energy use or appliances. It specifically prohibited, quote, natural gas infrastructure in newly constructed buildings. And it defined natural gas infrastructure as the fuel gas piping in or connecting a building to the meter. So you can see, right, like that is that teeny little piece, right, from the meter to the building. That's what it prohibited, and then inside the building. So unfortunately, the Ninth Circuit, it's a bit of a fraught case, but suffice it to say that there was an initial opinion, 2 Trump-appointed judges One, sitting by designation from the Court of International Trade, which is like, oh man, I just can't imagine that guy knew what he was doing. And then Judge O'Scanlan, appointed by President Reagan. So the court's initial opinion relied on a very expansive interpretation of the preemption clause, broader than President Biden's U.S. Department of Energy and the stakeholders expected. And Berkeley filed a petition for review for en banc review over the summer of 2023. And then on January 2nd, 2024, it was a terrible first day of the year back at work. The Ninth Circuit narrowly denied the petition for en banc review. But the panel did issue an amended opinion, and it added language that's pretty clear that they considered Berkeley's ordinance a building code. And they said that when they are considering express preemption, they consider the plain meaning of the preemption provision. Well, that was really quite problematic because when you look to the dictionary definition for the terms that are used in EPCA, this is a very highly technical statute. The dictionary definition is not the proper place to go when you're looking for a definition of terms. I will say Judge O'Scanlan wrote a lengthy concurrence, and he called out the Ninth Circuit's jurisprudence on what's called the presumption against preemption, and he identified it as being ambiguous here in this circuit. I kind of get the sense, he's sort of an old school Republican, I kind of get the sense that he might have liked to apply the presumption against preemption because we're talking about a federal law preempting a local law. And that is really contrary to sort of traditional Republican, philosophies. So I'll just say that the court focused, as you can see here, these are some quotes. They focused on, specific provisions of the EPCA statute and concluded that you couldn't eliminate the use of an energy source. There was a beautiful dissent written by Judge Friedland the first time in her 10 years on the bench, and 10 judges joined her dissent. So where does that leave us? A building code that is EPCA compliant, right? I told you there's an EPCA building code exception. But it also has to comply with Oregon's building code. I just want to call out the fact that Oregon has a uniform building code. So unlike other places, Oregon cities can't adopt a building code that is contradictory or contrary to the uniform building code. There is a local amendment. We haven't seen anyone use this as an option. It is a process, and local governments really don't like to sort of put their authority into the hands of a state agency and have the potential for the state agency to mess with either the amendment that's been proposed or to deny their ability to do it. I think it would be interesting to try it. But cities, they have to have one go before them before they can do it. So we haven't seen anyone do that. I will say that the statute specifically says that when the building code division is reviewing this local amendment that a city proposes, the director shall encourage experimentation, innovation, and cost effectiveness by municipalities. Thank you. So there is that as an option. Zoning ordinances are another option. Let me find my slides here. The zoning authority, right? Local governments have the right to preclude new fossil fuel piping in the right of way. That's an option, an ordinance combined with their zoning authority. In this way, you could think about a local government having climate-friendly development, right? True climate-friendly development, considering walkability, transportation options, and then, natural gas use, eliminating natural gas use. Judge Baker's concurring opinion in the California Restaurant Association v. Berkeley case specifically puts it pretty bluntly, saying if a state or local government terminates existing gas utility service or declines to extend such service, EPCA likely has no application. So I think that's pretty helpful to engage local governments in thinking about what their options are. Eugene has this really interesting overlay zoning district. So maybe rather than making a complete zoning amendment in a particular part of the city, you could do an overlay zoning district. Of course, there's also, let me see one more, if I have it back here. No. There is the ability for states to potentially use the Federal Clean Air Act, which gives states and local governments latitude to enact building or appliance emission standards. New York City has done that. We have proposed that to local cities. It is a little bit, makes them a little bit nervous because they, for a variety of reasons, but often it's a capacity issue and just implementing a new policy that may be difficult to implement. And then finally, of course, you have voluntary zoning and process incentives. This is always an option, right? A city can always encourage buildings to build with the kinds of things that they want to see. I'll say that voluntary zoning and process incentives are not totally effective, right? Direct regulation is actually the way you're going to see the kind of movement that we need to see at the pace we need to see it. And then this is my last slide before I introduce Samantha. Why don't you just call out, counties have specific statutory health authority, and then cities, of course, under their home rule authority, have the ability to adopt ordinances and rules related to public health matters. So some examples: tobacco regulations in Tillamook County, wood smoke regulations in Multnomah County. And then here is my mention of a policy, possible policy option allowing an ordinance, a city to adopt an ordinance addressing outdoor air emissions from gas appliances because they exhaust outdoors. And that is time to turn it over to you, Samantha. Is it okay, Meredith, if we asked if there's just one question from the audience? Are there any questions? Awesome. Okay, I'll pass it to Samantha. Oh, yeah.
I kind of have one, but
Yeah, go for it.
I don't mean to.
No, you're good, you're good.
So like with the Ninth Circuit decision with
Yeah.
EPCA, I read that and it seems like they're talking about the pipes
Yeah.
going, in the
Yeah.
building, and you can't do that because it would somehow prohibit the use
Yeah.
of natural gas. So
Yeah.
how do you get around that with things like emissions and
Oh, yeah.
and other examples, like maybe a tax or something like that, where you're taxing the
Sure.
use of the appliance? Do you think?
Yeah.
How do you think those fall into that?
Well, I mean, I will say there's specific language, again, in Judge Baker's opinion, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, actually. So I'll hold it on the fees and taxes. And then in terms, I mean, I think the question that I have about the Ninth Circuit opinion is, if you're precluding the energy use by prohibiting, right, the infrastructure from the meter into the house, how is it that you can go up the pipe, right? But they are pretty clear in the opinion that it is about Berkeley, the facts before them, which is infrastructure from meter into house.
Okay.
And then they sort of, they would be wading into difficult territory if they suggested that EPCA precluded a city from controlling its distribution system under the city's public right of way, right? So the analysis would be different when you're talking about EPCA preempting something like that. The purposes of EPCA, right? Imagine if every state or local government had a different efficiency standard for the HVAC appliance you're installing, right? Like, what a nightmare. That's really what EPCA is about. So I think the court would be loath to go beyond what Berkeley found.
Alrighty, public health, yay! Woo! So I wanted to start off by giving you all a brief intro to Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. We are an organization of health professionals and public health advocates working to address the gravest threats to human health and safety. And our mission is to prevent what we cannot cure. And I wanted to speak a little bit about the power of the public health voice. So one thing that is super important in our work is using our health professionals and our doctors in our campaigns because they're actually considered to be one of the most trusted messengers. So a lot of people listen to their doctors, eat an apple a day or take your medicine or whatever it is. Same thing with pulmonologists, nurses, dentists, etc. And we have found also that public health is something that both conservatives and liberals can get behind. Everyone has a body, everyone's health is impacted in some way, and I think that is something that everyone can easily relate to. And I also want to talk about lived experience of health impacts is also super impactful. So I have found that when we are organizing a campaign, that community members expressing their lived experience with the specific health impact or a specific public health concern, it's also super moving in terms of the narrative that we're trying to build for the campaign and trying to pass a certain policy or legislation. And so one thing that we like to talk about is how methane gas impacts health in numerous ways. So as Carra was saying, you have gas stoves, which impact indoor air pollution, and then you have gas appliances like furnaces and water heaters that impact outdoor pollution. There's also the safety risk with possible explosions, carbon monoxide poisoning, and then there is also the health risk with the fossil fuel life cycle in general. So from fracking to the processing to the shipment of the fuel, as we saw in that slide that Carra pulled up about the infrastructure. And of course, it's impacting the climate and resulting in greenhouse gas emissions that are driving the climate crisis that we are unfortunately experiencing. And we not only like to talk about the health impacts, but we also like to talk about solutions that can resolve those health impacts. So one of those things is building electrification, which greatly reduces all of these risks. I wanted to briefly talk about a really important report that was put out by Multnomah County, basically summarizing the health impacts of gas stoves, which I'm sure everyone in this room already knows. But it was super powerful because in this report, they actually recommended that people switch gas stoves and other gas burning appliances when they need to be replaced to electric alternatives. So that recommendation was super powerful because it outwardly states switch to electric. Also super important because we spend 90% of our time indoors. And this is something that we're always facing and experiencing when we're cooking or baking cookies or whatever it is. I really like this slide because it differentiates the pollutants that are produced by cooking with electricity versus cooking with gas. Obviously, we have particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and other carcinogenic air pollutants like formaldehyde that are produced when cooking with gas. And then when we're cooking with electricity, the only pollutants that are produced are particulate matter. Very drastic difference. And so this is, again, powerful when we're talking about public health, but also the public health of children. And this has been specifically powerful because, the children are our future generation. People have children and they think about like, oh my gosh, I have a gas stove. Am I exposing my child to these possible detrimental health consequences? And so there was a meta-analysis that unfortunately on average 42%, there's a 42% increase in the risk of asthma in children living with in homes with gas stoves. And again, when we are using public health as a tool, these statistics, these analysis are super helpful in having elected officials understand just how concerning the public health concern is. And these are just other health impacts of nitrogen dioxide, which is one of the air pollutants that is produced when cooking with gas or when gas is combusted. So there's all-cause mortality, lung and breast cancer, adverse pregnancy outcomes, the exacerbation of chronic lung conditions, and there's also some cognitive and learning deficits as well. It's also, was a study, it's also been associated with an increase in Alzheimer's, which is really concerning. And then one thing that is also super important when we're talking about public health impacts is centering environmental justice communities, and the fact that low-income households are at a higher risk to gas stove pollution and also pollution in general, air pollution. And this is because of a number of factors, including smaller unit size, so there's less space for the pollution to ventilate, older homes with inadequate ventilation, higher exposure to outdoor air pollution. So there's also this dynamic of people also possibly being exposed to more outdoor air pollution because they live near a highway or a specific power plant or something like that. And then unfortunately, actually my fiance told me that in New York, when there were really bad winters, they did use their gas stove as supplemental heat. And so those are just a few reasons. And then I'm gonna take out my handy dandy journal, talk about this really amazing report called Oregon's Hidden Air Pollution Problem, Fossil Fuels in Buildings report that Verde, Beyond Toxics, Oregon PSR, and the Oregon Sierra Club worked on together. And this report was really powerful because it found that burning fossil fuels for heating and water heating in Oregon homes and buildings actually generates as much nitrogen oxide as the state's cement manufacturing and power generation combined. And when you put that in perspective, that's actually a lot. And so this report also talked about the benefits of electrification. So switching to heat pumps could cut climate pollution from the average Oregon home by 41%. There's also benefits to our wallets. So there was an analysis that was conducted that found that transitioning to electric heat pumps could unlock more than $1 billion in system-wide savings by 2050, and that the installation of heat pumps has also been shown to increase home values by up to 7%. Okay, 2 minutes? Okay, amazing. I'm almost done. So another thing with using the public health angle that we have found is super helpful is bringing in the economic side. We're living in a cost of living crisis, and people really resonate with how they can save money. And you can also, health is costly in that you need to go to the doctor, pay for your copay, or maybe buy some air filters. And so bringing in that like money saving aspect has been super persuasive in our campaigns to electrify. And so one more thing that I wanted to mention is that the power of also public health institutions. So one example is the American Public Health Association actually came out with a statement that gas stove emissions are a significant public health concern. And so when we have health institutions coming out and saying like, hey, this is a really big problem, and here is all the data and studies that show that this is a problem, it's super powerful, and we can use that name, that credibility to help pass our policies. And that is all from me. Thank you so much. I think next up is Nikita.
And we do have time for one question here, and we'll have more time for questions at the end. But if anyone has a quick question for Samantha, go for it.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. My first time at PIELC, or PIELC, I don't know. PIELC? Okay, cool. I work at Coalition of Communities of Color. We're based in Portland. We are an alliance of around 20 culturally specific community-based organizations. We do statewide work as well as local work, which I'll talk about today, at the city and county levels as well. We have a research justice team, and they work on community-owned data and research around all the issues that impact communities of color. And I'm on the environmental justice team. We do a variety of work around energy, climate, and water. So today I'm going to talk about some of the work we have done and are doing in the cities of Portland and Milwaukee, and specifically around buildings and climate action. And so I wanted to bring up this word cloud. So this was from a virtual workshop that we did, co-hosted with the City of Portland and invited BIPOC Portlanders to join. And we asked the question, what values would you want the city to hold in a policy around buildings and climate? And so this is what came up. And we really wanted to start with that. We also didn't mention the words building performance standard because that doesn't mean anything to majority of people. And to be honest, before I started this job 5 years ago, I didn't know what that was called. So I didn't know what that meant. So we strayed away from calling it that, from jargon. So we started with values and really kind of returned to this throughout the development and engagement process. So for some background, this work started in 2018. The City of Portland joined the Zero Cities Project, which was a network of 11 cities. Some of you are nodding, you're familiar. 11 cities across the US leading on climate with the goals of advancing racial equity and transitioning buildings to zero carbon by 2050. So Portland, we have been working with the City of Portland to gather input from community about what they would want to see in buildings policy, how those two twin goals can be reached in an equitable way that meets people's needs. So we hosted several virtual workshops between 2021 and 2024-ish. We convened a core group of community members, BIPOC Portlanders as well. And so in March of 2021, we had a community workshop specifically around energy burden. So we kind of framed these workshops based on what we knew people were experiencing to gather input in a way that met people where they are. There's Spanish on some of these slides because I literally took them from our slide decks that we shared at these community workshops, which, yeah, we're all bilingual. And so we asked people, what does energy burden feel like? People said it felt uncomfortable, they felt fearful, it was stressful. People are obviously adapting their budgets to pay bills and are making really difficult decisions between essentials like medicine and food and energy and keeping heating on in the cold. People have family and social network obligations where they're helping elderly family members with bills and finances. And most people mentioned discomfort with interacting with their landlords. We asked people, do you feel comfortable going to your landlord if there's an issue in your home? Most people said no. Rarely people had some, good landlords and felt comfortable, quote unquote, reaching out to them. And there was generally a lack of awareness around utility programs, discount programs that were available, other resources people could take advantage of. Obviously, demonstrating a need for better outreach from our institutions around things that could help people alleviate energy burden. We held a two-part policy convening. These are the recommendations that came from that. We held it in July, and this was only a couple of weeks after the historic heat dome in 2021, where so many people in Multnomah County passed away and died from this extreme heat. And so heat and temperature were really at the top of people's minds at this workshop. So people, talked about air conditioning. Most people didn't have air conditioning. that people talked about the need for proper insulation and ventilation. They felt like if they did have ACs, they were keeping it running for a long time. Their homes were getting very warm still. And people want to see energy efficiency. They understand the comfort and the benefits that come from having energy efficient appliances, weatherized homes, and people want to experience those benefits. And people had really cool ideas around other modes of passive, what we call passive cooling, like trees being planted near homes to provide shade in, specifically in areas that are experiencing urban heat island effects. And then, yeah, the theme of more information was prevalent. People want information, especially prospective tenants, which I'll talk about kind of where that recommendation went. And so we took all of that feedback and we created what are called the HEART standards. So the HEART standard stands for health, equitable energy, anti-displacement, resilience, and temperature. And you can think of this kind of like a policy framework. So I added some quotes here from the workshops that led to the acronym, like the framework being developed. So people said, yeah, there should be minimum standards for residential buildings. We should have more information of gas stove risks, all of the health impacts that Samantha mentioned. People weren't aware of them and were very like thirsty for information to share with their community members and their networks about those risks. People also experienced, had really struggled through the wildfire seasons in 2020 and 2021, and wanted their homes to be refuges from disasters like that. People are also, interested in and worried about climate change. People have these are community members who have experienced firsthand the impacts of climate change and continue to. And these are also, people who are least responsible for climate change. These are the most energy conservative people. Like community members that I've talked to literally tell their kids and themselves to bundle up in the winter and not turn their heat on. And that can lead to like really dangerous conditions, as we've seen. But people want cleaner energy, and they want that to be cost effective. So yeah, people mentioned cost, of course. We had a whole workshop around energy burden. People are worried about that. Anti-displacement. Kind of at the center of the acronym as well. So people were wanting to see the benefits of upgrades kind of be passed on to them through costs. And names just, we've all experienced the rising utility costs consistently over the past few years. And of course, resilience. So we, focus a lot of our conversations around real world climate impacts and how people got through them, how people navigated them, what they wish they would have seen. People want, their buildings and their communities to be supportive of them as we see more climate extremes. People also wanted to be prepared. And then temperature, people mentioned some really dire situations they were in, getting sick and the health impacts of extreme heat and not having AC. Some people went to their, social networks housed. And I think all of these sort of strategies for how people navigate disaster and how they are resilient without the support of like our institutions are great to know, so that we can like support those strategies in our policies and our programs. And I'll pass it to Carra for a second.
So you heard Nikita say the words building performance standard. Who does not know what that is? Oh, awesome. Okay, so we have a few. So it's essentially, we've talked a lot so far about policy options for new construction. This is one of the rare options that could impact existing buildings. And so it typically applies to commercial buildings, and the idea is the city sets the standard for high efficiency, high performing buildings. and then benchmarks along the way. So giving the building owner the opportunity to meet that performance standard over time. Working with the city and identifying investment options. Some have investment opportunities available, funding opportunities available to assist the building owner. So I am interrupting here because after CCC did all this hard work with the city of Portland, the Oregon legislature also thought this would be a great idea and adopted in 2023 as part of an omnibus bill, HB 3409. So this is one where they pulled together, slapped together a lot of stuff. So this is a quote from section 9 of the building performance standard that directs the Oregon Department of Energy to adopt these standards. Then there is this carve out because the city of Portland was like, hey, we're doing this. Please don't preclude, right, to that preemption, preclude our ability to continue to implement the work we've already done so much on. So this is what they pulled together. And you can see any lawyer looking at this or any normal person looking at this is like, whoa, that is messy. A municipality may adapt an energy performance standard and greenhouse gas emissions reduction standard that's more stringent or that has broader application than the energy performance standard that the department adapts under this section. And then there are 3 conditions. One is that it can't exceed the energy efficiency requirements of the building code, right? That uniform building code. The standard cannot apply to buildings that are less than 6 years old, measured from the date of the building certificate of occupancy. A whole lot of questions around that. And it has to align with the DPS. Basically, the city has to work with ODO to make sure you're not putting the building owner in a position where it's like not aligned sufficiently or ODO is concerned enough about it. So a whole host of questions about this. Luckily our representatives and senators made some very good statements on the floor of the House and of the Senate as this was getting passed to make it very clear that the local government has the authority that they've always had. And that the intent is not to change anything that local governments can do now, but this is just to create a building performance standard for existing buildings, and it won't apply to recently constructed buildings. The idea was like, we don't want to have somebody who's just put up a building and then have them immediately be subject to a building performance standard when they put up a building last year. So that's the intent of this BPS language. The ODO standard that has been adopted is pretty mediocre. So I'm going to pass it back to you to talk about Milwaukee now, but we'll also hear a little bit more, I think, about the city of Portland.
And I think I'm running out of time, so I'll be quick about this.
I took up your time.
Oh, no, you're fine. All good. So like we talked about, Portland took all of that feedback that we heard and developed a policy proposal called CHESIP, that acronym, Climate and Health. It's not as catchy as the HEART standards. Yeah, we kind of peaked with that one. Climate and Health standards for existing buildings. This is an ordinance that will be introduced to City Council this year, which is exciting. Includes a tenant health notice piece where I talked about that want for information. So this will be this is the information that will be provided to prospective tenants in the application, and it establishes emission standards on buildings with some provisions to protect against displacement. So this will be the City Council is working on updating this draft and working with stakeholders now to make some fixes, and then it'll be introduced, which is really exciting. Seeing this work move forward, and then I'm going to talk about Milwaukee.
And this is just a sort of an easy peasy thing that advocates can ask their city councilors to do. Just direct staff to investigate opportunities, get them moving on a policy, and then come back with recommendations to city council.
which is where CCC has come in. Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, reached out to us to see if we could lead community engagement efforts in their process as they've passed this resolution and now want to gather input to help develop some policy recommendations that their climate action committee can consider. And so early phases, this kind of like the fun phase where you get to talk to community members about what they would want to see, and it's kind of exciting. People can be creative. And so we are hosting and have already hosted our first one, a series of workshops in the city of Milwaukee around energy efficiency, climate and health, impacts and benefits. And then CCC will take what we've heard, aggregate that feedback and create a report that we'll submit to the city and share our recommendations. So far, people are obviously concerned about the cost of electricity, interested in climate and health benefits from energy efficiency, and you know, a lot of people at this first workshop talked about education around technology, education around induction stoves, around heat pumps, and there might be some lack of information. So again, highlighting that need for info. Yeah, the city of Milwaukee is also considering small businesses and how they fit in, and so we kind of framed our conversations around, you know, homes that you live in, and how might policies that impact buildings impact small business owners. So we're going to kind of dive into that more in March and April. If you know anyone who lives in Milwaukee, you know, send them that QR code and they can come to our meetings. But yeah, kind of exciting work happening in Milwaukee and Portland. I've been told there's time for one question.
I have a question, really quickly. I'm really curious about the information that you were talking about. I think you were saying Portland was required to provide to tenants as part of the rental application.
Building owners are.
Oh, building owners. I'm curious. Is there, we're working on similar stuff elsewhere in the country. Is there anything have you done any look about at making that information available at the listing stage instead of at the rental application stage?
Yeah, I think that this came up in a community meeting, and I think people, yeah, I don't remember why it wasn't why the recommendation wasn't listing stage. I think the city thought it would be easier in the listing stage, in the application itself.
Yeah.
But yeah, something to explore for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. People, I think, yeah, the people who were tenants that we talked to wanted to know, as they were applying, whether there's an AC or whether there's a gas stove, and that was what was expressed. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That's cool that you're looking at that.
Yeah.
Well, and a pitch that Daniel and his team are going to be here this afternoon, 2:15? 2:30, and maybe you can tell me the room and you go to that, because it's about tenants and building electrification. Okay, so here is a really exciting, I'm going to pass this off to Jess in just a minute, but just to set you up, there's this notion that if you break it, you buy it. And so I will say layered on with other policies. I don't know that we would want this to be the only policy, but it is an opportunity for cities to generate revenue to support electrification in existing buildings. Again, this is a new construction policy as opposed to an existing building policy. But for new construction, you could impose a fee on gas appliances that are installed in new homes. And so the idea here is this is a choice modifier, right? You're actually hoping not to raise very much revenue, right? You're hoping people aren't going to put the gas appliances in that are going to generate the revenue. But you also are hoping to offset the dirty discount so that people choose actually to put in electric appliances as opposed to fossil fuel appliances. So I will pass it. Oh, and I'll just mention one thing about the Berkeley case to your question. that the case itself says nothing about fees, right? Not the fact before them. But Judge Baker's concurrence helpfully reflects that EPCA does not preempt carbon taxes. And that's just essentially what this is.
All right, who's tired of losing these days? Well, I'm really excited to be able to share about a win that we had in the last year that a couple of folks in this room were a part of making happen. My name is Jess. I'm the organizing director at Road Climate. We're a community organization focused on organizing alongside communities in Southern Oregon and the South Coast for climate justice. And in the past couple of years, I've had the honor of working really closely with our youth team in the Rogue Valley, the Road Climate Action Team, or RCAT as I'll refer to them, on their campaign Ashland Youth for Electrification. And we won, which is so fun and exciting, and really glad to share the stories of how this went about and also some of the challenges along the way, since many other places are exploring this too. So we got started really in 2017. We were able to work alongside the city of Ashland to pass a climate and energy action plan, or the CEAP as they called it. And what happened as our youth team, mostly high school students in the Rogue Valley, saw this kind of playing out as really a document on the shelf that wasn't being implemented significantly. And they were like, we got to really hold the city accountable to what they said they're going to do, which was a pretty ambitious plan overall. And they saw successes in places like Eugene and Berkeley in banning gas, and they're like, we want to do that. They were also learning about the health impacts that we heard about from Samantha and experiencing the climate impacts that Nikita was talking about in terms of extreme heat, wildfire smoke, missing days of school because of asthma, because of threat of wildfires, living through the Almeda fire, and really experiencing climate change firsthand as they grew up in the Rogue Valley. So like, we have to hold our leaders accountable. This is ridiculous. Basically, what are you doing? And so they decided they wanted to launch their campaign with a bang, and they organized a massive walkout of Ashland High School. Over 400 students walked out, and then were joined by hundreds of other community members in the downtown plaza, demanding action on climate justice. And then the next week brought a draft ordinance ready to go for the city council to pass to ban gas in Ashland, focused on all buildings, residential, commercial, all new buildings. And then the Berkeley decision happened like immediately after that. It was really annoying. So our plans really shifted. And so this is just a very simplified version of what our campaign art ended up looking like. But when that Berkeley decision came in, thankfully we had great friends like Carra Sahler to help us out. We're like, don't worry, we can figure something else out. And at the same time, lawyers across the country were like, okay, what actually is possible for local municipalities to do? What are our avenues to continue to have an impact? And so we got really to be a part of that super creative first steps in figuring out alongside the city what we could do. And one of the ways that we were really able to move something forward is that we insisted upon youth leadership in the city government. We were able to get 2 youth on our campaign team appointed to the Climate and Environment Policy Advisory Committee, another horrible acronym, CPAC. And they got to be a part of the policy research of exploring what was going to have the most impact, what was going to be most winnable. And so we did a ton of just campaign learning together, really side by side about that in real time. And really that we also experienced together what's challenging about working with local governments, especially rural governments that have really limited staffing, limited resources, challenging budget decisions, and a lot of turnover. So we also experienced, I think, 3 different city attorneys over the course of 2 years, many gaps in that capacity. And so we're trying to figure out how do we do something pretty ambitious that they really don't want to do, but also are like, yeah, we share these values. And try to come up with some opportunities to move forward. So we were able to push the city to do a stakeholder engagement process that was quite robust, and of course pack those rooms with all of our members of our base about the impacts that they're experiencing of climate in their homes, the concerns they had about health and affordability. And we were able to move that community committee to move forward a couple of policy recommendations. And then ultimately over time, continue the progress forward with a lot of pressure from the outside to get council to direct city staff to draft a policy. And that ended up being the pollution fee that Carra mentioned. And ultimately, we were able to pass it with a unanimous vote in February 2025. And we won. Yay. So initially, we wanted to really push for a combination of multiple policies, and there's still a possibility to go back and build upon this win. These are some of the other options that Carra has already mentioned. A low NOx emission standard was one of our favorite possibilities. A commitment to banning new pipes along public streets and sidewalks. That's the right-of-way ban, but nobody knows what that means, so that's the way we described it. The pollution fee is what we ended up being able to move forward. And we also wanted to see a resolution to explore and transition off gas in existing buildings, and including commercial and industrial in the future. So here's some detail about the actual policy. As Carra mentioned, it really incentivizes 100% electric home construction by imposing an upfront fee on installing gas appliances in new residential construction based on the social cost of carbon that gets adjusted annually. And then the revenue generated, which hopefully over time is not very much, is actually dedicated to energy assistance programs. And the fact that Ashland is a municipal utility really aids this element that we were able to push for in the final hours of this policy to get an additional environmental justice benefit that within the city utility, this revenue will go towards low-income energy assistance. And we knew that actually we really wanted to start up a climate justice fund that could actually support folks to transition to electrification. But unfortunately, it wasn't going to generate enough money. Larger municipalities may have more success with that avenue. And it also requires utilities to report on annual fossil fuel consumption for residential and commercial customers. And so this is also setting us up for future wins to be able to build upon this policy. So our strategy had multiple layers to it, building a powerful community base of support, really centering youth leadership and developing their own campaign strategy skills, their storytelling skills, and also their really incredible lobbying skills. They lobby like no one else I've been around, that's for sure, better than the gas industry these days. We wanted to tell our story about connecting these kind of wonky policies to the things you've already heard about today. Climate justice, equity, health, and affordability. And we also were working to build political power to influence the process, such as getting youth on that city committee and building really strong allies within the council. And we've heard about this a lot already, so we'll just build off of what folks have shared. But this was really what we centered because no one really wants like carbon pollution impact fee. Like what is, no. So this is what we talked about instead. And these are some of the key tactics that really worked for us. We were able to identify a key champion and to power map the council and build relationships with leaders who had influence, such as developers who already had experience building energy efficient, 100% electric homes more affordably. And we did a lot of lobbying and preparing key storytellers to be spokespeople. And then we got really creative on the outside to push and build our community power. We showed up at every city council meeting until they put us on the agenda because they were moving so slowly, and we had literally written the policy for them, and they decided to redo it anyway, but that was their choice. And we had a volunteer team that was made up of adults who were really accountable to the youth team who was making all the strategy decisions alongside staff. And this is an example of one of the ways we really made things creative. And this was an idea of our youth leadership team to do bingo at city council meetings where you're often in the overflow room, the tech usually isn't working, and trying to keep people engaged because they're also like, these are high school students who are showing up every other week to city council meetings for basically 2 years. So we had lots of prizes. We had fun snacks. We had bingo. We made a massive scroll that they unrolled of all the petition signatures they gathered when we won. So we made it really fun and interesting. And I know I'm out of time, so I'm going to wrap up with some quick challenges, which is that we did experience some fossil fuel industry pushback in the final hours. And this was actually one of the most fun parts of the campaign, in my opinion. We were able to get a city council meeting delayed because of a snowstorm. And it was right after this fossil fuel industry front group that we were able to tie to the American Gas Association sent out a bunch of robo texts, basically saying this is going to raise prices, this is going to stop business, all the things we know that they're going to say. And we were able to keep them from coming and testifying. When they actually did show up to our final vote, there was only a handful of them. And one of their union guys that they recruited to be there literally got up and was like, you know what? I don't know, like I'm just here to support my brothers in the union, but these kids might be right. And I think that was really the moment that sealed the deal, and we got the unanimous vote. So I'm happy to share more and answer questions, but I will leave it there and just want to really highlight and thank all the support from Carra, GEI, and so many partners across the state who turned out to really help us pull this off. Thanks so much.
Just really quickly wanted to note that the policy is tied to the social cost of carbon. That is not the politically approved figure, which we know has bounced around. Rather, it is based on the report that informs that political process. So it's tied with a scientifically vetted, audited report that's published and has that figure in it.
Yeah, just like, I don't know, another round of applause for Jess. Those programs are few, far, and in between right now, so we should keep celebrating them for at least 2 years. Also, I'm just gonna invite everyone, invitation to stand up. I don't know, take like 15 seconds. Personally, I have really struggled with being, this has just affirmed to me that I can't go to law school, because I look at the classroom and I like cannot sit in a chair for this long. It's really hard to not fall asleep this weekend, and it's a long conference. Not a reflection of the subject matter, just the attention span of a goldfish. Anyways, my name is Brennan, campaign coordinator with Energizing. I'm gonna really just focus on a common thread that Nikita, Jess, Samantha have all sort of highlighted, which is just we have the science, we have the facts. It is just how do you communicate and tell a compelling story around this so it gets people activated and electeds to pay attention and understand. And I have a 3-step plan to do that. Step 1 is de-jargonizing. I'm gonna highlight a particularly egregious example of a meeting I had recently. That's me when I was 10 and lived in Arizona. And this is our main climate staff person, Ben. And she was like, we can totally pass the policy this year. We just need to have like a few more meetings because we're a city government and that's all that we do. And I was like, that's cool. What do you have in mind? She's like, well, we dropped the TCAP process, so we're gonna get CNGC, PPC, ECA, HACCP, EDAP, HREC, ECC, EV, and COP together for a roundtable. Does that sound good to you? And I was like, yes, it does, but also not helpful for 99% of people because that's too much alphabet soup for anyone to drink. So in light of that, I came up with an acronym of my own. NA. Acronyms. Hypocrite. Me, because this is that slide is new. But really, like, as much as you are able to, talking to volunteers or staff people or electeds, like, in one ear out the other. The more acronyms there are, and rule of thumb, I try to not use any when I'm talking to anyone, barring the last slide, but that was demonstrating a point. And also just Len, I'm relatively new to the organizing space, I'll say. My background's in chemical engineering. I jumped ship fully like 8 months ago to do this work. Part of my frustration, thank you. I have no health insurance. But like part of my reason and what has been my North Star getting into it is like when I was volunteering, it was like we have a steering committee call every week and it's gonna be someone reporting out about those types of meetings with that type of language, which was like, I'm astonished I'd stuck around and kept volunteering because it took like 1 or 2 years just to get up the learning curve of like, what the hell are you talking about? So a lot of it started to like just make blank space, especially recognizing like millennial, older Gen Z crowd, like these are people working on their laptops. The last thing they want to do after you get off work is like go sign a petition or write an email to counselor, like, find a way to give people beer and Pavlov them into liking climate action because it's associated with things that they like. Also, shout out Peyton. I stole this idea, but nothing's scarier than Climate Change Action Week. Somebody wore a pumpkin to City Hall. It was awesome. That's step one. Step two, salientification. I thought about doing sexification, but I wasn't sure if I was allowed to or if that was like a CLE credit. So I changed it to have more syllables, which wasn't great. But things are, I don't know if you've noticed, it's kind of shitty to be on the world right now. There's lots of bad things. First and foremost, after winning the AFC West for the first time since Peyton Manning's with the Broncos, they're considering trading Bo Nix, which is just like absurd to me. That aside, there are genuinely bad things happening in the world right now. It is pretty exhausting to pay attention to the news, and I think most people doom scroll in some capacity. So like, how do we give something that like actually fills people's cups, right? Because if it's doom and gloom locally too, it's like, I'm exhausted, and that's not cool. A compelling way to keep people engaged for the long haul that is getting anything done in any level of government. Some examples. I'm stressed out. We keep invading foreign countries. And I'm like, us too. Did you know that we have better energy sovereignty when we're not importing oil or fossil fuels from other countries? Why is it 65 degrees in the middle of March and bad? We're like, did you know most of our emissions are from buildings? We can do something about that, unlike at the federal level. So you should come drink beer with us and talk about it. And it's like, why do we pass a fee? It's expensive. And we're like, you don't have to pay the fee. That's the whole point. We actually hope that nobody pays the fee. So that's probably not the direction that's going to happen in Bend, which we can talk about where the policy departed from Ashland later, but I'll be time sensitive. Okay, last step. Step 3, this is the hardest one. Be happy. It can be really exhausting, which is like that's not novel news to anyone here, but truly like you need to find a way to make the work sustainable for you, because any movement is only as sustainable as the people that are carrying it. I don't like this slide. Organizing is a team sport though, so like a big part of it is find what you like doing. I am not a lawyer and I have no interest in being a lawyer. So call your legal advice, who are not my lawyers. They told me I couldn't put that on the slide. Shout out Danny, shout out Carra.
I can't call myself.
Your Australian barred or...
Andy gives really good advice, though, so I'm glad you included him.
Yeah, so that's actually who I was highlighting. But make your friends where you can. Just highlighted this, like if you identify your champion in government, like you need an inside ear and someone that you can feed talking points to so they're not putting their foot in their mouth saying stupid things at council meetings that drives the narrative the wrong direction. And find what you like doing. This is our Nothing Scarier Than Climate Change Week. I dressed up, oh my god, I'm forgetting her name. Who is? Not important. Anyways, we found a way to like wear costumes and do gay things. And then, show of hands, does anyone know Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson? Okay, right? Yeah, I wish. She also has a really good heat pump costume, which is an aside. But she has this theory, or concept rather, the climate Venn diagram. What do you like doing? What are you good at? What needs to be done? Find a way to be in the middle of that Venn diagram as long as you can. Me, also, I put high school me in mostly for Carra because I found out we went to the same high school rather. Shout out Chatfield Chargers, Silver Burgundy. But yeah, I played football for 11 years. I am a recovering frat rat. I was also in a frat in Tucson. I worked at a landfill. I also, used to work in the biofuel industry for an RNG firm. Aspiring ski bum. I have discovered since I started this job, I think I'm an extrovert as well. Shocking. But like, finding ways to fold the things you genuinely like doing, like make that billable time, and then your life will be great. Now I can bill time when I'm making reels on the mountain talking about how bad exposure is. That's it. Yay. Thank you. Are we doing a question? We're doing a question? Dan?
I was going to say, it was a very meta presentation. You kind of like gave the content by giving the content. The whole slides and everything was really kind of distilled like individual communication styles. That was a comment, not a question, but just like I said.
I discovered Canva background. Yeah, if you haven't discovered Canva background remover, you should use it because it's the best. Okay. That's me.
We really are lucky to have him. The last one we're going to just talk about, but just very briefly, taxes and fees, right? Local governments have authority. This is an example of Eugene's natural gas supplier tax, which luckily they had in place when their franchise agreement negotiations ended, because one thing cities really, really, really want to keep is getting revenue. And that's how they get it, is through those franchise agreements. So when that came to an end, they had this to land on. They could increase it. That is one idea. And then otherwise, make sure you're following your city's charter and carefully review state statutes because there are preemption landmines.
Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Again, my name's Aya. I use she, her pronouns, and I work with the Breach Collective. Breach Collective. And as a lot of these presentations have shown, this work is incredibly hard. I have been working in the climate policy space for about 4 years now, and it is a battle. It is exhausting. And one benefit of a ballot initiative is that we can really take things into our own hands and we can expedite the speed at which we try and pass policy. So I'm really excited to be talking about how we can fight back at the ballot and how we plan on doing this in Eugene. But first, PSEF. How many folks in the room know what PSEF is? We got quite a few folks. So the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Initiative was a wildly popular initiative that was passed in 2018, which provides incredible amounts of funding to ensure the community climate action efforts are implemented and support social, economic, environmental benefits, and specifically, working to benefit frontline community members and communities of color.
I'm glad it's not just me.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
All right, here we go. So the Portland Clean Energy Fund took 1% of the gross receipts from the biggest corporations in Portland, the billion-dollar corporations. And PSEF has banked hundreds of millions of dollars a year for climate justice, and as of February 2026, has allocated $1.7 billion into the community. It's an incredible thing that has generated more money for climate justice in a municipality that we know of in the world. So example projects, we're looking at energy efficient, affordable housing, habitat restoration, protected bikeways, repair cafes, clean transportation projects, and more. And this was also the first environmental initiative in Oregon led by communities of color. So we can, oh no, we can't see it. We can see the steering committee organizations here, and you may recognize some of the names. Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility and Coalition of Communities of Color were organizations that helped steer this incredible groundbreaking initiative. So the big question is, why haven't we done this everywhere? Why haven't we done this in Eugene? Why haven't we done it all over the state? And the reason why is because a PSEF-style initiative was thought to be preempted by the Student Success Act of 2019. And I have some of the language up here. A city, county, district, or other political subdivision or municipal corporation of the state may not impose by ordinance or other law a tax upon the commercial activity of the or upon receipts from grocery sales. Oh boy, sorry. It's okay. We're gonna figure it out. So I think what is really important to highlight here is the term commercial activity. And our lawyer friends, legally minded friends can kind of dig into this more during question and answer if we'd like. But essentially, the way that commercial activity is defined in this context is the total amount realized by a person arising from transactions and activity in the regular course of a person's trade or business without deducting for expenses incurred by the trade or business. So that is a tax on gross receipts or tax on gross revenue. And this is actually a fairly specific, this is the problem, isn't it? This is actually a fairly specific preemption, right? And so one of the brilliant minds behind the Portland Clean Energy Fund came to us in Eugene and said, what if we just changed the taxing mechanism? What if we looked at putting the fee on gross profits instead? Gross profits are the gross receipts, which Portland placed their fee upon, minus the cost of goods sold. So, for example, if you buy a lawnmower from Walmart and it's $100, the gross receipts of that would be the $100 that the customer paid. But the gross profits, which we would be looking at using in Eugene, would be the cost of that lawnmower minus whatever Walmart paid for it. Maybe it's $30. So the amount that we would place the fee upon would be less. So the revenue generated would be less, but we would still be able to proceed with a PSEF style initiative in Eugene or anywhere else that might want to go after this. So this is allowing us to follow in Portland's footsteps. If you are interested in learning more about this, this is discussed in this publication by Green Energy Institute and Breach Collective. And we were able to get this legal pathway vetted by 2 of the state's top election attorneys. So we are really excited just to introduce and start talking about the Eugene Clean Energy Fund. So we filed the petition for this initiative just last month, and it will be, oh no. It will be a business license fee of 2% on the gross profits of the biggest corporations operating in Eugene. So we bumped the fee from 1% to 2% to try and make up for some of that difference that we see in the revenue that could be created. We also think that the big corporations might deserve to pay a little bit more at this point, a couple years later down the road. So this would apply to businesses earning over $1 billion nationally and $500,000 locally. This allows us to avoid placing the fee on any of our amazing local businesses. And it also avoids having the cost passed down to consumers because businesses that operate nationally, these big box stores, they set their prices nationally so that they can set their sales nationally. And so the beauty of this is it truly just affects those big billion-dollar corporations and not the everyday hardworking Eugene citizen. So this is slated for the November 2026 ballot, estimated to earn a floor of $15 million per year. And just thinking about what that could do for our community is so exciting. And the other great thing is that we see that the appetite for something like this is really there in Eugene right now. Our polling data showed that about 63% of Eugene voters would support this initiative if it was on the ballot today. And when I say today, but actually this polling is a little bit old, and so we think that this could be even more given how increasingly difficult the political climate has been. The Portland Clean Energy Fund was really strong in the amazing diverse coalition that they were able to form. We are trying to really follow in their footsteps in that regard. The steering committee for the Eugene Clean Energy Fund will include Breach Collective, Beyond Toxics, the Oregon Just Transition Alliance, and the Oregon Sierra Club. But we also have a number of amazing frontline community and frontline organizations and community-led organizations, as well as partnering with unions and strategic partners who have helped develop this campaign, and this coalition is growing. So I want to just pause for one moment to talk about our partnership with organized labor. So one of the things that we really wanted to make sure happened with this initiative is that not only were we talking to organized labor early, but we actually were having them help draft this initiative, because as we will see in a minute, some of this funding will go towards job training and apprenticeships, but we also wanted to make sure that worker protections were baked into this policy. So not only will it be generating climate revenue, but it'll also be creating good, clean jobs for folks here in Eugene. And so we were able to partner with some union leaders to make sure that this initiative would do just that. So here is where the funding will go. I'm not going to spend too much time here, but just so you can see, we kind of have rough allocations of where the funding would go, the majority going towards renewable energy and energy efficient programs, but also job training, as I mentioned, green infrastructure, and kind of a catch-all category for things that we hadn't thought of. Why this, why now? I don't know if we really have time to dig into this, but I will just say that the city of Eugene is wildly behind on its climate goals, just as we saw in Ashland. We have high aspirations and we have a long way to go. And this fund is, I think, one of the only ways we see as providing the opportunity to truly try and meet those goals. There is a loss of funding at the federal level, and this trickles down. And of course, the climate and affordability crises are already here, as we heard from our other speakers. And so the timing couldn't be better for an initiative like this that will help generate revenue to make sure that we are meeting those goals, that we are putting that money back into our community, creating jobs, and helping folks thrive. All right, how? Maybe I can talk more about this in question and answer, but essentially there are two ways that typically things get on a ballot. You can run a ballot initiative campaign, or an issue can be referred to the ballot by our elected leaders. There are quite a number of reasons why we decided to go and get out and collect signatures. A big one being that the process of getting things referred through our elected leaders can be slow. Things can get watered down. Things can end up getting tabled endlessly. And wins like the amazing one we have in Ashland aren't very frequent. So we wanted to make sure that this was happening with the urgency that the climate crisis demands. We also wanted to make sure that the community was doing this together. By getting out and gathering signatures, we're going to be educating folks about this campaign. We're going to be building momentum and excitement and making sure people feel ownership over this campaign. So we have to gather 8,726 to qualify. We're going to try and get more than that. And I see the time that we have, so if I can get this this slide projector to work, I have some ways that folks can get involved or learn more about this campaign if you're interested.